Hey everybody, welcome to the Grace in the Gray podcast, where we use the black and white of scripture to speak truth into the gray areas of culture. I'm here with Ben, James, and Rick, and James has an awesome icebreaker for us.
Cool. So today we're going to be talking about spiritual gifts, but we can't talk about something that we don't have a framework for. So name 2 or 3 spiritual gifts, but wrong answers only. I'll start hungry.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'll go next. Juggling.
I could
like
argue
the physical juggling?
No further clarification.
You'll get nothing.
I'm thinking of juggling many different... Okay, I guess that's still...
Either way, it's still wrong.
Still juggling.
You might be confusing that with administration, but we'll count it.
There we go.
Administration covers so many things. It could cover everything.
That is a right and wrong answer.
It's a gray,
Sarcasm.
It's a gray answer.
Sarcasm. Snarky.
I was going to say pettiness.
The spiritual gift of pettiness.
That was the Super Bowl halftime show.
Spiritual gift of false promises of prayer.
I'll pray for that.
I'll pray. I'll be praying for you. No, you won't. What else we got?
Are those enough wrong answers?
That's probably enough to get us started. So now to redeem that. So like a few years ago, let me start over. Several weeks ago, not several years ago, we attached at the bottom of our notes when we were talking about spiritual gifts and a message on Sunday, a spiritual gifts test. So I, in my home group, did the test. I think a lot of people did. And I thought it'd be interesting to discuss some of those things, especially if you took the one that we had. It had like 15 gifts ranked according to your individual strength in that gift. And I wanted to talk about some of the high points, but also, if you took that exact test, what the low points are too, and what that might look like in your life.
Do we have to talk about those low points?
We'll talk about my low points, and then we'll take it from there. Cool. So, for those who have taken it, or have taken one like it, what are some of your strengths? Or I don't want to confuse it too much with like the Gallup Strengths Finder, but what spiritual dimension did you... That's really not a good way to phrase that either. What were your top 3?
Okay, my number 1 was apostleship.
That was my number 2. And that's why I wanted to have this podcast. Ben, what does that mean?
Please explain it to us.
I have no idea. So
I thought it just meant discipleship.
I don't know, because I have a working definition of apostleship that I think is biblically accurate, but I, like most things that come out of my mouth, I wouldn't stand by it.
It's 50-50.
I wouldn't even say 50-50. To me, the difference between an apostle and a disciple, because those two often get kind of blended together, as an apostle is somebody that seems to be biblically defined as somebody who had like firsthand experience of Jesus Christ. The one person who's kind of a weirdo by that definition is Paul, although he did have firsthand experience. It was pretty limited, but he's specifically referred to as an apostle. You only, to my knowledge, and this is like the Holy Spirit thing, like I'd have to do an exhaustive search to know for sure. But to my knowledge, the only time the word apostle is used, it's referring to someone who has that kind of interaction. So that's where I'm deriving that definition from. So yeah, I don't know what it means in terms of spiritual giftedness.
When I looked at it online on some of the places that list that in the list, and it's so difficult because so many of the comprehensive lists that you're going to find of spiritual gifts online, a lot of them are going to have a great deal of commonality, but some of them are going to take a few leaps here and there because they're listed at different points in the New Testament. And we could put those in the show notes where you can find those lists and where they're pulled from. But those who chose to include that word or that particular gift as apostleship, I think a pretty cool, easy working definition for at least us to use in this was like motivators, church planners, people who look beyond the walls was kind of the definition that the particular quiz that I was looking at for maybe a little bit more clarity on why that word was listed as a spiritual gift. That's how they were choosing to define that gift.
So it's in one of Paul's lists, apostle lists?
Yeah. So, I don't know. I'd have to go and look at that. I don't want to answer that with any certainty. I'm just saying when I looked at it as one of the results in one of those.
So
those
doing
tests.
something like what the apostles did at the very least.
Yeah, what you see them doing in the New Testament.
Kind of entrepreneurial in nature. And
I guess entrepreneurial, missional living, which results in church planting and the kingdom advancing.
Yeah.
Like looking beyond kind of where you are to see where God could be sending you. So I would contend that's probably a great deal of what we would think of as missionaries and church planters would probably be high on that gift.
So rewind. That was your number 2, and that was your number 1? Mm-hmm. Okay. Were you able to kind of reverse engineer the test and go back and find questions that you strongly agreed with or disagreed with that corresponded to that result?
Did I or could I?
Did you?
No.
Could you?
Probably.
Okay. I'd be curious to see what those questions are, because that might shed a little light on what they mean when they assess for it.
Mm-hmm. What was your number 1, James?
Serving.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's solid for you. That's solid. I see that.
Rick Lee seal of approval there.
Yeah.
You are, in fact,
Rick,
spiritually gifted. Congratulations.
Yeah.
What was your number 15, Rick?
Is that the worst one?
Yeah.
Usually when I take the test, full disclosure, I didn't take the test that we put on the notes a couple of weeks ago. I did help vet the test that we were putting on the notes a couple of weeks ago by watching over Sam's shoulder and judging all of her answers and deciding if I agreed with what she had chosen and not chosen for herself. She was mostly accurate. There were some discrepancies in both ways. Sometimes I think she went too high, sometimes she went too low, but it was neither here nor there.
I'm the type of person, I don't have a lot of middle ground. I was either a 1 or a 5.
Yeah, Sam is the person that ruins the whole thing. It's like all of this is meaningless. We got no meaningful data from this quiz.
I'm the opposite of you.
You're in the middle,
3,
everyone.
Put 3.
I've never taken this test, and I will after the podcast, which will be exactly zero help. But I'm middle of the road on everything.
Yeah, I think usually when I take tests like that, usually the ones that end up near the bottom for me are mercy. Which is not surprising to anyone who knows me. I have a tendency to be very forthright, very truth-driven. I do not struggle with truth as much as I struggle with grace. My wife helps me with that. Thank you, Misty, for that. But that is usually near, if not at the bottom of all of these tests for me. Is kind of one of my greatest struggles. So, which is usually at the top of the list for me is discernment, which has always been interesting to me. I do find that to be true in my life. Often my first take of people ends up being the most accurate take that I will get of people.
I feel like you've said that before on a podcast. That was one of the things. Oh, we'll have to go back in the archives and
see if we can find it.
Yeah, because it was a good discussion, and you were talking about
on what,
how, like giving people second chances, maybe.
Yeah.
Because you feel like you get a good read the first time, so it's hard for you to give a second chance.
Yeah.
That's what it was about.
Yeah. So.
I thought my discernment was 13 out of 15. And you called that out. You were like, that's right. And I was like, really? I thought I was a pretty good judge of character. But apparently not.
Sam, you recognize all of the good in people, and I just recognize that people are mostly bad.
It's so pessimistic. That seems like a miserable outlook, but it's not. It's not miserable. It's reality.
It is. Thank you.
So what are you high in, did you say? And I missed
What?
it. What are you high in?
Usually high in discernment and teaching are the two that I usually score the highest in. What about you, Ben? Have you ever taken any test like this, similar to this? Do you have any spiritual gifts is basically what I'm asking you.
No. But I have stayed at a Holiday Inn Express. No, I have taken, what was it? The one that gives you 4 letters, Myers-Briggs.
DISC? It doesn't DISC give you? No.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking the Enneagram that gives you 2 numbers or a number, like 7
One number.
wing 1, 7
Not the
wing.
Enneagram. No, I did take the Enneagram.
Yeah.
We were on like a family vacation and we were all doing it just for fun. And then there's another one that gives you 4 letters, which I think is the Myers-Briggs personality. But I don't.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
ESFJ.
That's what you are?
I can't.
You're
It's
E
in my
something.
head.
because the first letter is introversion versus extroversion. I've never taken a survey or an assessment for this, but I do know the only one that's like consistently showed significant psychometric value is the Big Five personality assessments, which if you know, I guess. And I've never taken that one, but I'd like to. But these I've never taken. I've had people tell me what they think spiritual gifting might be.
What do you think makes these types of tests? Because it's it's whether it's spiritual gifts or what Harry Potter character are you or whatever the test is. These things get so popular on social media and those kind of things. And I think there's maybe some value, some whatever. At least it gets you thinking and maybe conversing with people. What do you think renders these? Because you just said that there's only one that has ever really been proven over time to show like any tremendous level of accuracy. What do you think keeps them from being accurate? What is it about our personalities, our whatever, when we take these tests that prevents it?
Well, so actually I had a conversation with our care and counseling director during a meeting once, Bianca, and we were talking about self-evaluation in particular. And I was saying I didn't think that self-evaluation held a lot of value psychometrically. And she was pointing out, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And then I asked her, what dictates whether it does or doesn't? And she pretty much said, either it does or it doesn't. And I did a little bit of research on some studies that have been done to try to identify different areas of study that seem to benefit from self-evaluation versus areas of study that seem to benefit, you would call it peer evaluation. So somebody that knows you is answering the questions, kind of like what you were doing for Sam, Rick. And it turns out it depends on something that's pretty obvious. If the thing or the area that you're evaluating for is like has a social component and like by nature, the peer evaluation is more accurate. But if it's something that deals with like your internal experience, self-evaluation is more accurate. So that seems to be the difference there. But all that, I guess, as a really long explanation to say, like a lot of these deal with a social component, and yet these surveys are usually set up so that you can self-evaluate. So we may have some accuracy issues there.
Well, James, what surprised you about your test?
So what surprised me here was probably the things that I scored the lowest in. And I say surprised, I wasn't that surprised. My bottom two were mercy. So contrary to the test results, Rick, I feel you. And the lowest was exhortation. And I looked at that and I said, goodness, I am textbook judgmental. I don't feel bad for you, but also I'm not going to tell you. But
so exhortation is the gift of encouragement, right?
So my wife actually tested high in exhortation, which didn't surprise me because I know the spirit of what that word means, but defining it I struggled with. And what I ended up telling her was, that's when you tell people what they should do, or this, you ought to be doing this because you know that. Actually neglected to bring this up on a podcast months ago, but if I remember right, like when Paul traveled to the different churches that were in the places he went, he would go into the synagogues there and speak to, I don't know if it was necessarily a Jewish crowd because he was touring the Gentile world, doing what he was doing. But he would go to the synagogue. He would participate in the exhortation part of their service, which I think was after we had the contemporary versus traditional and whether or not church should be comfortable or not. And what went through my head was, they had a part of their structured service where you would exhort people to do things. So that's kind of in the face of the whole conversation we had in my mind. But that's what Paul would do. And he did it well because he would say, hey, here's what the Old Testament said. Here's what Jesus did. Now here's what you should do because you know. So using that as a framework, I looked at my wife and said, you tell people what to do real good. And she said, yeah, I do. And I said, yeah, you do.
So that was your bottom two?
Mm-hmm.
Did we talk about your top?
So we did a little serving and apostleship were my top two, and then teaching. Mm-hmm. And then, oddly enough, if you take what I do here on staff at Cedar Creek and wrap those things together, that's my top 6. So that rounds out with knowledge, administration, and wisdom. Mm. So
where was faith on yours?
Number 11 in the average range.
Oh, I didn't even look at the ranges.
Same as real time.
I mean, I see it, but, and then there are colors too. So, all right. So this quiz, it gives us these categories and then it ranks them. So how do we match up if we want to put this into action? I think one of the reasons we shared it with the congregation was to say, all right, find out where you're gifted and then see how you can use these gifts to serve others.
I think there's an important differentiation that needs to be made here, and it's kind of in line with the conversation that Ben started. Quizzes like this or things like this may be a wonderful starting point, but they are, I do not feel, and Ben has already cited, hey, this has been proven time and time again across many different fields, not just a religious or spiritual tested field, that this is not the ending point. Like, do not take this quiz and then go, okay, well, I'm gifted in teaching and exhortation and apostleship, so I'm going to plant a church next week. And then you get out there and people are like, you're not gifted in any of those things. There is some really, really important component to having people who are willing to do what I did for Sam without her asking me, I might add, of looking over her shoulder as she took the test and then discussing it. I think that's, when we do things like this, it always points back to our slogan of better together. Like, these are things that are meant to be a starting point that I think can launch into conversation like we're having here. That's a fun roundtable discussion to go, hey, what gifts do you see in me? What gifts here's this test I took. Do you agree with this? Do you not agree with this? That a 15-minute web survey is never going to be, Paul never said, hey, take this on Facebook and run with it and decide what God's calling you to do through that. That this is a great resource that we have that's meant to be a starting point. So I would just be careful as to a listener that's listening here going, I just heard James say that what he does at Cedar Creek are basically the summary of his top 6. So I'm going to get my top 6 and then I'm going to Indeed.com to figure out where God's leading me to have a career change or do those kind of things. It may come to that, right? Like, it may get to that spot, but I don't think that's point 1 and point 2. That may be point 1 and point 35.
Out of curiosity, you said you don't know for sure what your results are because you haven't taken it. You just have a guess. But from those guesses and from what you know your results are, is what James said about his career also the case for you too? Based on those strengths? I
think so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think yes and no. Mine is, I struggle with stuff like this too because I don't think there's very many things on that list that we're not called to do. And I especially think that that's true for somebody like myself who's called to pastoral ministry. Like, I don't get to not be merciful because I suck at being merciful. Right?
You're saying that even though I scored lowest on giving, I still have to give.
Yeah, you still have to give.
Yeah, but I guess I'm making the observation, I suppose, that certain occupations require a greater level of competency in specific areas than others do. And I'm wondering if for both of you, your strengths line up with that occupation as well, or if you're in an occupation that you're developing your weaknesses or what that looks like for y'all. Mm.
Yeah, I think it mostly lines up with the strengths of where I am right now. Yeah. And I think the cool thing about these spiritual gifts thing that's worth considering as well is that there's moments that it's going to push into the weaknesses as well. I always say when I was doing student ministry, I used to tell kids when they were like looking for jobs, they're like, I just want to find a job that I like all of it. I'm like, that job does not exist. Otherwise, it's not called a job, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's moments that are going to grate against the weaknesses that we have, whether it be spiritual or just personality-wise, demeanor-wise, whatever it may be. Yeah. And those are opportunities to grow more than they are to get frustrated. Yeah. But sometimes growth is frustrating.
Yeah.
That makes me think about serving in an area that you may not necessarily feel gifted in.
Yeah, that's been spoken about a couple of different times from the pulpit when we've talked about these kinds of things. Just recognizing that gifting is a part of a decision to serve and serve in a given area, but it's not the only part.
Yeah.
Need is a heavy driver.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also serving is serving, right? You're doing it for someone else.
Yeah, there's also, and this sounds terrible, but I just find it to be intrinsically woven into the word that is serving. Serving brings to it some level of suffering or sacrifice. By nature, that's what serving is. I'm doing this. And so it's, this idea of I am going to serve in the place that I most enjoy. Well, that's depending on what level of unpacking you're willing to do with what that means to enjoy. That's either really, really shallow or can be really joyful. But I think there's some work that needs to be fleshed out there. Otherwise, you're not serving. We're probably just scratching a itch to self-gratification or whatever it may be to make myself feel important, however it may be. And so I think there's some avenues where sacrifice and doing things that are a bit more servant-minded out of a servant heart are important in that aspect.
Yeah. Did either of the people who took it, James and Sam, have something that you wished going in that you had and you didn't get it, or vice versa? You wish you didn't have and then you did get it?
Sam wishes that giving was higher because that would mean that she is wealthier.
Although this past Sunday, though, when Charles gave the giving moment, I was like, okay, I feel a little bit better about myself. Like maybe I'm the widow in this situation. Give him my last 2 pennies.
Sam, are you okay? We have a wonderful resource called Financial Peace University.
Sam got told this last Sunday as politely as she's ever been told that you are poor.
No, we're just a family of 5 with 3 kids and 3 activities and,
Yep. So nothing you went into wanting that you didn't get, or anything you didn't want that you did get?
Yeah, I was not shocked. I don't think I've ever taken any type of inventory like this and not had serving blow everything else out of the water. That's just always been me. Okay. Apostleship was new to me. That word was new. So that was unexpected, but it wasn't. I wasn't the whole time thinking, man, I sure hope I get apostleship.
Yeah. But it was a surprise. Okay.
What do you think prophecy means in this context? Like if somebody gets a 1 of prophecy.
I mean, there's...
Someone's in my home group with a 1 of prophecy, by the way.
Yeah?
They exist, yeah.
So what did they say about it, or what did you say about it? Break it down.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it. This is a person who... These are some of, I guess, the outworkings of it, but not the gift itself. This person is a little bit more direct and not afraid of confrontation, but also very, very loving. Not loving in a gentle sense, but loving in I really want to help and have your best interests at heart. And when those two things function really well together, you get the kind of person who is willing to speak truth, even if it's the hard truth to hear. And those people are infinitely valuable to have in your life, especially the ones that stick around long enough and confront you often enough to be able to strengthen you in receiving that kind of truth, and also to prove that you can trust them when they give it.
So when you're saying that person is the one, you're saying that would be their highest.
Yeah, is that not what that means?
No, yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. Yeah, I was just clarifying because in my mind when she said 1, I went to bottom, but then I remembered you were doing 1 through 15, and so sorry, I was confused over here in my own head.
Yeah,
so maybe helping you if you're a leader.
And as far as the biblical model, I think we talk about this in the biblical interpretation class where we talk about the prophecy books in the Old Testament, but you only have a very small subsection of prophetic work in the Bible that's actually telling the future, which seems to be what most people gravitate towards, or some kind of like miraculous, mysterious knowledge. The vast majority of the time the prophets are speaking, the thing they do is they speak truth in particular to people who hold a lot of power, or to a majority that's strayed in some way from God's word. And so I know lots of people that do that to varying degrees and to varying levels of success, I guess, as well. But that's how I would define a prophetic gift.
That's a
helpful.
Good distinction, because before you started saying that, I was thinking, now what really separates prophecy from exhortation if they're both speaking on God's behalf to people? But that's a good delineation of the two.
Plus, I think even with your definition of exhortation, where it's, you know this, so you should do this, for the most part, a prophet is just saying the truth. They may not even give any additional information about what you should do. It's just a reminder, like, that's wrong, or this is right, or that kind of thing.
One of the better, like, modern explanations I've heard of that, oddly enough, comes from John Christ. He toured years ago with a band, a Christian band, and I don't remember who it was, and I am blanking on what the other word was, but they were like, "You're the prophet." And it was an Old Testament kind of model of things where, and I wish I could remember what the other party was, but they said, "We're here to encourage, but you're the prophet." The prophet's role was to show up and go, "Hey, have y'all really looked at this thing that you're doing?" And like you said, it's
kind of a critical thinking role.
Yeah, and John Christ does a lot of that, and he'll talk about the role that comedy plays in a lot of that, of kind of bringing out something that's truthful, in, an ideal sense, and kind of bringing that out in the opening and go, "Hey, is anybody else looking at this?"
Yeah.
And that's kind of the prophet role of that kind of agitation, not to the point, not condemning necessarily, but like you said, coming from a place of love, like he stresses. He said, when he talks about church stuff, he says, "This is my team. I'm not coming at you from outside. It's from the inside." But at the same time, take a minute. Have we looked at this? Can we talk about this for a second?
Yeah, that's a spiritual gift that has to be developed very thoroughly before you can use it with any level of success, and it won't be necessarily your fault when it's not successful. So that's a tough one to walk in.
How do you develop spiritual gifts?
That is a very complicated question. It's not even complicated. It's just the answer is multifaceted. I mean, there's the obvious stuff, right?
Okay, you can develop spiritual gifts,
absolutely.
because you're gifted initially, but then it can get better over time.
Sure. I think you're being sanctified, which I would argue the definition, not argue, but I would present the definition of that of being molded into the image of God, or to the image of Christ, is the manifest image of God that we have here. And that's from the moment of salvation until death, and you stand before God where you're made whole. And so I think if you read through these, Jesus possessed all of these in entirety, right? Like, there would have been none of these that he didn't have, or that he didn't have the ability to fully flesh out in the appropriate and given moment. And so I think, you can certainly be molded and craft more of these. I go back and look at sermon outlines and things that I taught early in my career, and I would say that teaching was not a tremendous gift. You know what I mean? Is it something that I had to lean into? I had to have people correct. I had to practice like anything else. I had to work on, pray through, all of those kind of things. And so, I think they're definitely molded. There's a variety of ways that they are. I think just like these kind of quizzes, some of the best ways are always with other people that are helping you, that are willing to flesh out their spiritual gifts around you to help you develop yours, especially those that you're lacking. I mentioned, like, mercy is not one of mine, but God in his sovereignty put me with a woman who is unbelievably merciful. And so that helps me at moments live that out, because my discernment goes, no, this person probably sucks, and so you need to treat them like they suck. You know what I mean? And she's like, none of us suck. We're all made in God's image. You need to be merciful. And I'm like, you are correct. You are right about that, and I need to learn to walk in that. So I think sometimes I think it's a great resource to surround yourself with people, or allow yourself to be surrounded by people who are high in the things that you're low in.
Yeah.
That's a great way to learn to be what you're not, to develop gifts that you may not initially feel that you have.
Yeah, you mentioned this as a first step. That's something that has been in my head since I've got these results, especially seeing that mercy and exhortation was low, but knowing that that's kind of the opposite. My wife was high in exhortation. I'm least in that. But we've been in situations since then where, with this in my head, kind of as a starting place, I've been a little more self-aware that when we're talking about specific things and people in our lives that have questions about different things, I understand that I'm inclined not to approach that with mercy. I have a lot of other things that I'm going to approach that with. If you need help from me, I'm probably your person, or if you ask me about it. But if you're looking for sympathy, I'm going to have to work at that. But I'm also aware that I have people around me that actually are naturally gifted at those types of things. And that, I think that's the beginning of not the next step, but the step after that. That's step 2 of being able to say, okay, well, how could I do this a little different? Mm-hmm. And over time, I can see that being mistaken for growth.
Oh.
It's weird. We were having a discussion in my home group when we did this week in the series, that week of, and I started, and it's so weird to me, some bizarre thing about the way that we relate to one another, because on the surface it seems like it should be so easy, and I just opened with the question. I just said, hey, I want you to speak to anyone else in the room that you want to, and I want you to tell them what you believe their spiritual gifts are. And it was like everyone was so uncomfortable, with this idea of I'm going to speak to this thing. And it was a compliment. It's not like I was telling them hey, I want you to dunk on everybody and tell them what their spirit, how you suck at being like Jesus. That's not what I told them. I was I want you to tell somebody, and I was I don't care if it's your spouse. I want you to tell them which of these they're good at and why.
There's a lot of complex social dynamics that go into an interaction like that.
Yeah, for sure. But I think there's so much value in it, and I think there's so much, you read Acts 2 and you get this understanding of what the early church was doing in this studying, in this fellowship, in this being together of, this call for believers to be able to do really both of those things well and openly and transparently, in terms of sharing gifts, sharing weaknesses, developing, working through, producing in one another, partnership in this sanctification process alongside the Holy Spirit, and seeing us be molded into the image of God. And I think it's difficult, but the cool thing of that discussion is when somebody finally stepped up and started doing it, it was such a rich and meaningful and beautiful conversation that flowed out of it, that also left everybody feeling edified and encouraged, because it was I didn't know I had that gift. I didn't, or I'd never thought about myself being gifted that way, and now I know, and I can lean into that. I can also be challenged by the fact that I recognize that is my gift to take a next step in it. It's important.
I'm going to take this again after the podcast when it's not helpful. Do you guys want to guess what I might see?
What Ben might see? I'm going to guess
wisdom.
Knowledge. Yeah, knowledge and wisdom are going to be high for you.
Mm-hmm.
Knowledge is just literally knowing objective fact, and then wisdom is the application of it, or what's the definition? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to say teaching. I don't know.
I would say prophecy.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you are mean.
No.
Mm-hmm.
I remember.
See, this is discernment and mercy right here playing on opposites. I said you're mean, and she said no. Nobody is mean. People just need to be taught to be nice.
What in what sense, or do you have a thought in mind when you say prophecy?
Well, when you were describing your friend in your group and how
you were thinking, are you the friend in your group? Be honest. I wasn't,
now
but I very well could be. Yeah.
No, that it sounds like some of the ways that you interact, even when you're teaching the biblical interpretation. Now, I know that's a topic that you're teaching, but even in conversations around this table, that comes out.
I have a hard time with knowing how I actually feel about confrontation, because the person I know best that has skin on, that's a human being, is my wife. And she, compared to me, absolutely hates confrontation of any sort. So I don't know if I'm a lot more comfortable with it than she is, but still less than the average, or if I actually am just okay with confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
So I have never been able to accurately assess that for myself.
I think it's interesting because I think there's a whole nother cool discussion that we don't have time for today here, but inside of that prophecy thing, like, I almost see the gift of prophecy as not seeking confrontation, but just seeking truth, regardless of if it's confrontational or not, right? Like, I don't back down, but I'm not going to this because I thrive or seek this thrill of confrontation. I seek for the truth to be made known. And so here's what I know about God's word. Here's what I need to present to you. And if that's confrontational, well, that's between you and God, you know? So I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ben has to take the test.
Yeah.
Our listeners get to take the test.
Notes.
Yes, we'll put it in the show notes.
Ben's test results.
You can comment with what you think my results might be.
We'll put it on our Patreon.
Yeah. Patreon.
Do we have one of those?
Not yet.
No, but we can put it on Instagram. We'll screenshot your results. How about that, Ben?
Yeah.
You up for that?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't really care.
All right, well, we'll put the link for the quiz in the show notes, and then we'll update you in between now and next episode on Ben's results, and then you can let us know what you think. So we'll see y'all in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening to the Grace and the Gray podcast.